Here we go.
Who put the key in funky?
Live
Yes.
streaming is on.
Okay.
Hello, world. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is March 5, 2021. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with both Clinton Ignatoff and Simon Prentis. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello.
Okay, so this is a series called McLuhanMashups, but today we're going to not seriously substitute the word McLuhan for either magic, mystery, or music. So I think it's better to call it music mashup because we be jamming here. So James, call it what?
Munch, L.A. Munch. Remember, that's an anagram of McLuhan.
An anagram of what?
McLuhan is L.A. Munch.
Oh my God, that
Hey,
is good. Did we know that, Clinton?
No, you didn't.
Didn't make that one up yet.
Wow. How did you come about that, Simon?
I thought, how many letters are there in McLuhan, and how can they be arranged to make something that sounds less scary?
Oh, that is it. But this was just today or years ago?
No, I did it when you first told me about it.
Oh my God. How many? That's big. So James Joyce reacted to the information overload that we live in by satirizing it. So that's what we're doing in these Zooms. We're just satirizing information overload. Why even study the hidden effects when we can just swim in them like a warm bath? So we can just swim in this Zoom and chill out and relax. We don't have to worry about what it's doing to us below. We can just have fun on the surface. So Marshall said, associated with transformation of the real world into science fiction is the reversal now proceeding apace, by which the Western world is going Eastern, even as the East goes Western. So that sounds like a bunch of bullshit, which it is, but he really got it from Joyce, who encoded this reciprocal reverse in his cryptic phrase from Finnegan's Wake: the West shall shake the East awake, while ye have night for morn. So Simon and Clinton, let's start with Simon. Why in the heck would Joyce say something like the West shall shake the East awake? What's the difference between the East and the West? Aren't we just all the same?
Yeah, we are. But in my case, the East was the thing that shook up the West. It shook my West awake. Most definitely, it was that way around. It was like, I took the journey to the East. The famous Hermann Hesse book, which sort of encodes all that kind of romanticized. I won't go as far as orientalized. I think he was not as bad as McLuhan. I think McLuhan had a slightly kind of orientalist view of the East as being this sort of somehow intellectualized, perhaps, which is certainly not the case. But in my case, I'd bought the whole kind of Wizard of Oz thing, and so going to Japan really shook up the West, if that is the East. But in fact, it's a globe, so there ain't no East nor West at all. So I think we're past that now. When I went to Japan, everybody called it the Far East. Does anybody ever say the Far East anymore? I think we stopped saying that about 25 years ago. In fact, the first time I was going to write a book, I was going to call it Far East, Far West. And then it metamorphosized into Far East, Far Est, Far Out. And then it stopped being that because nobody says that anymore.
So. Wow.
Right. But let's let Clinton respond to what you just said, and then you can tell us the history of how that happened to you just briefly. Okay. Go ahead, Clinton.
That's funny. I hadn't thought of the phrase the Far East. I mean, growing up in the 90s, there was, anime on the kids' television stations that I watched, right? Japanese culture, even in its most commercial form, right?
Yeah.
Has sort of is an essential element of, I think, everyone my age and younger. So the idea of Japan as being, I think other than this very close emotional culture that I've never been there, but I certainly have some emotional, you know,
That's really
attachment
interesting.
to the culture as a, you know, as a nostalgic even, right? So
There's a really interesting book called Wrong About Japan by a guy called Peter Carey, who I think was, well, he was certainly into all the traditional aspects of Japan that so many people of my generation, I think, who were interested in Japan were. And so his son grew up really into anime and all the stuff that you just described.
mhm.
And he said, "Okay, son, let's go to Japan. I'm going to show you the real Japan." So they get to
Oh,
Japan, and Dad sort of takes him to see, like, traditional sword makers and the tea ceremony, all this shit. And his son, in the meantime, has busy networked and found all these connections with, like, anime nerds and people into cosplay and all the sort of the stuff that they do. And
yeah.
he takes Dad to see these guys. And he goes, "Oh." So the title of the book, Wrong About Japan,
Oh,
is
they're both
about
wrong.
his, yeah. Well, they're both wrong in a way,
Mhm,
yes.
mhm. Right, right. Yeah,
But
that's
the
interesting.
Far East, just to get straight in Far East, I mean, is that, you've heard the word presumably, but in what context have you, or maybe you haven't? I don't know.
It it rings a bell. It's probably some old book or some I don't know, maybe I was watching some 1940s film or something, but it's notable because I've A, heard the phrase, and B, can't place it or think of any context in the
Right.
contemporary sense where anyone would use it whatsoever. So
It'd be
some
really
some
interesting to find out when it sort of kind of dropped out, at what point it stopped being. Jerry, you grew up with the Far East, right?
may, m- m-
Yeah,
maybe with
I'm a,
automobiles
I'm
and
a,
computers. Maybe with the importing of automobiles and computers, it stops being the Far East when you see people driving a Toyota or a right.
Yeah, yeah, possibly.
well,
But
that's one good point. When my dad working for GM, I'm born in 53, so it's probably about 63. He gets flown to Japan for some car thing, to go to a conference on cars. And we were all like, wow. And the only thing that I can retain and that was big was that a McDonald's hamburger cost $10 there. Talk about far. I mean, the McDonald's was 2 blocks from my house growing up. So he goes to this exotic, and it was probably called Far East then. Who knows? But he might know. I mean, we could look it up when it transitioned. But it's like, just to put people in retrospect, what's going on here. Simon, you're born about same era as me, early
I'm the
50s.
53. I'm class of 53 too. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. And so you at what point, I mean, just briefly to give that context to Clinton, you read Hesse and go, oh, I'm going to Japan. What was the like boom
No,
to get
no,
you there?
it was totally by accident. I was at university. I spent a couple of years living in Israel by mistake, because I sort of wanted to get out from England, and that was the, the Israeli government were offering kind of people free trips to Israel if you work on a kibbutz and do some social work. And I thought, hey, free trip out of England, I'm going. I didn't know anything about Israel or anything. It was just not England. That was sort of conceptually not England. So when I came back to university, I was kind of like older than my cohort, if you like. I was about 21, and everybody else were brats straight out of the top schools, and they were all sort of just really not interested in anything that I had felt that I was really, grown up now. I'd spent 2 years out of the country and everything. I really knew the world. So I didn't really fit with the university thing. And as part of my escape route, I tried to find something I could do that would amuse me. And in particular, I was interested in keeping fit. So I thought, what can I do? Let's do judo, because judo was a thing in those days. It was like you can go and do judo and sort of learn to look after yourself and that sort of thing. And so I went to the judo club and just hated it. It was full of, like, people who play rugby, or in American terms, like this sort of football kind of jocks. And
Job. Yeah.
yeah, it was really, really not my scene at all. But on the way out, I saw this poster for a thing called Aikido, which is another Japanese martial art. And these guys wearing skirts and trying to bash each other with bamboo sticks and things. And I thought, what's this? This is weird. They've got a demonstration. I'm going to go and see it. So I went to see it, and I was just blown away. I just thought, this is something I need to know about. So I started studying it, and it was really the thing. It sort of, I kind of been caught between. Again, this is a thing that your generation probably doesn't appreciate so much, because I think you have much more freedom to kind of mash things up, if you like. But in my day, you were either a scientist or an artist. It was like one of the two. By the time you got to 13, it was like, so you're going to do sciences or arts? And, well, I don't know. I don't know anything about either of them. So how can I possibly choose? Well, you got to decide. You know? So I went for sciences. But by the time I got to 17, I was sort of realizing there's other things going on, and science doesn't get me out of bed in the morning particularly. I need to know what's going on here. So I switched to do literature, long story short. So I was kind of conflicted between these two worlds, and also the whole kind of mind-body thing, and the sort of religious puritanical crap that we exported to America, lucky you, but is also deep in British culture. So all these things were kind of confusing me and tearing me apart. And I started doing Aikido, and suddenly it's like, oh, they don't have these distinctions. It's like science and art. Well, they're aspects of each other. What the hell? And mind, body, no. There's only one thing. There's you. They kind of just, these distinctions melted away, and I thought, Jesus, this is, what sort of a culture figured this out? I got to go and see this. So after 3 years at university, I just took the first opportunity I could to go to Japan, and did. So sorry, that was a bit long, but
no, that really summed up a lot. And Clinton, you got to raise your hand if you got any input, because I don't want to dominate.
It's funny. It's funny. I just left an interesting conversation with a fellow who's talking about the fusion of psychoanalysis and neuroscience as two opposite approaches to the hard problem of cognition, which is, the mind-body split, whatnot. So this is still a driving, fundamental, existential question, haunting
certainly it is
budding philosophers and their relationship to their bodies and whatnot, even still today, right? This is why I'm so deep into McLuhan myself. So that's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, we could segue at some point into the role of language and all that, because I think that we're bamboozled by language into thinking that we have this thing called consciousness, which actually is really, all we're doing is tagging awareness. We have an awareness just by virtue of being an animal. I mean, all animals are aware. I mean, the idea that they're not, even though in Britain, I think as recently as 1980, they had to pass a law saying that animals should be considered as conscious beings, or that in other words, you couldn't just saw them up on, vets could do things without anesthetics. Up until then, I mean, this is Descartes. Descartes basically thought that all animals are autonomous. They have no consciousness, but we all have. What I like to make the distinction between awareness and consciousness. I think all living things have awareness by virtue of the fact that you interact with your environment. You need food. You've got to find it. You've got to be conscious. You've got to remember where things are. I think that's not disputed, that living things are aware. So what's special about us? The only thing is that we've learned to tag it so that I can make a whole bunch of noises with my mouth, and you can have some sort of approximation of what I mean in your head, which is pretty astonishing, really, when you consider.
Absolutely. Well, the noises, pre-written culture, the environment and the names we've given things elicit the noises out of us, as though we are possessed through the animism of our external environment. Right? To see a thing is to speak its name, and so this relationship is much more immediate and direct and psychotic or something. To try to repurpose pathological terms for something in a non-pathological context, right? But then through written language and conceptualization and silent reading, you can think of how there were stories in the abbeys during Middle Ages where one brother was reading without flapping his lips, and he was silent reading, and it bugged out all the other monks who were like, "Uh-oh, he's gone into his head, and he's divorced, language from speaking again," right? The ability to dwell in your mind and conceptualize, which constant exposure to the written word then, creates this gap of where we now can
Well,
conceptualize things.
it's very interesting you say that. I struggle and obviously cannot do sort of imagine a world where you wouldn't have an awareness of the written word and how you could just live in that sonic landscape without
Oh, it's
any attempt to do it. I find that
it's
impossible
like
to do.
the mimesis of the overpowering mimesis of Frankenfurter from the Rocky Horror Show. It's the other totally possesses you. It's why kids got into playing guitar and air guitaring when they saw rock stars explode in the 60s, or why kids do TikTok dances today. When you
Right.
haven't the distancing conceptualization, inner detachment from your environment, now you are possessible through mimesis by others, by the total captivation of the like tactility of the feel of the scene, which fills you and demands your response, like to dance to music.
Well, that's yeah. I mean, you could possibly say that about all music. Then that music is actually the zone in which you can kind of be occupied by sound without the need to process it at some sort of verbal
Ooh,
way. You know.
ooh, that's good.
Um,
Yeah,
uh,
right.
That's Igor gave the lectures. Music doesn't mean anything, and they're all like, "Oh my god!" And this is Frank Zappa mocking the guitarist that Clinton just brought up. And you look up at the sky when you're playing your guitar, and you go like that. You look, you're like, "Ooh, I'm really feeling a lot in this solo." Ooh, ooh. the pooched out succulents.
oh yes,
Ooh.
the
And
blues
so
face, the blues face.
the
Blues.
blues face. But
Yes.
what you guys said was amazing, because yesterday my friend said that the oldest word in the world is "you." Now, I don't know if that's true, but I wanted to
I
talk
don't think
about what you
anybody
were,
knows that.
huh?
I don't think anybody knows that or could know that.
No, or could know that. But if you study etymology, which we study deeply,
Yeah.
which I love because it's your neck of the woods, all the coolest words in the English language came from the slang on the crooks and criminals in the back alleys of London. That's where the cool words came from, where it was like the robbers and thieves and druggies. And they'll go unknown origin, but it could be like whatever they call those people, not droogies, what they call droogies in the old days, like the 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 bad guys in the back
Yeah.
alleys of London,
The
but
ruffians.
ruffians, something like that. But
Yeah.
the 3-word division is spoken word, printed word, and electronic word. And we talked about this a little before, Simon, because you're saying spoken word could have had gesture or grunting before. But we're going to just sort of say gesturing or grunting is part of spoken word. It's something coming out of your mouth. But when you
Well,
said,
grunting is what animals do. This is the thing. This is where language started, as far as this is my take on it. Anyway, I think Chomsky's
right,
got the whole thing backwards.
right,
It's it's not languages. Grammar comes much later. The first thing is you've got to have words, right? I mean, animals have grunts and noises that mean things. They
right,
screech and they make noises, but they don't have enough noises to have grammar. And the reason they don't have enough noises is because they don't put the noises together. They don't digitize sound. We have digitized sound. That's how
Mm.
you get words, and then you get grammar. Because when you have lots of words, suddenly you need to find a way of putting them together, or there are things to talk about that require grammar. But until that point, you ain't got no need for grammar. So grunts come first, but it's digital grunts. This is the
Mhm.
key.
And you're using the
oh,
term digital in its fullest sense of
yeah,
grasping.
Yeah, well that too, but no, I'm using it in like just systematizing, just like numbers, really. I mean, it's like if you,
Digits.
yeah, digits. I mean, you say a number, 1348, that denotes something that if you didn't have a system, if you had to have a different noise for everything from 1 up to 1348, you'd be in big trouble.
So
Do you know what I'm
if
saying?
I could ask then, Simon, what is it about the Japanese that you found? Is there a- any distinction regarding that between English
You mean the
or
language?
similarities? Yeah, yes, as it's spoken or as it works or as it
I
functions phonetically.
I wasn't drawn to it as a language at all. I was drawn to Japan, and I went out there thinking, because I'd grown up under this whole sort of Far East business, and anything that weird and alien, you'd have to be some kind of like freak to be able to understand that. That was my approach to it,
Mm,
unthinking approach to it.
mm.
And so I didn't expect to learn the language when I went out there. I just thought, I'll be able to figure it all out using English. I mean, surely. And after about 3 days in, I realized that wasn't the case. So I kind of sat down to learn the language and found that it came much more easily to me than I had thought it would. But only when I threw the grammar book away, because I had a book that was like explaining how the grammar works, and I tried to do that for about 3 months, and it just made my head hurt. I couldn't figure it out at all. It just seemed to be all backwards and didn't make any sense at all. And so then I was teaching in a school, and I just was around children all the time, and they were talking, and I was trying to pick it up. And then after I'd been bathed in this whole sort of new sonic universe for about 6 months, you start to see patterns coming through. You start to go, oh, there's that thing again. Oh, there's that word again. Oh, I got it. And then it's just sort of, then the grammar started to make sense to me. Once I'd sort of heard it, you've got to be immersed in it somehow, because there's no relationship to English at all. It's a completely different system. In terms of the way it tags things, the noises you use. I mean, they only use half the number of noises that we use, for example. There's only 20 phonemes in Japanese. There's 44 in English, which is a big clue that leads us to the origin of language, which we can get into a little bit later, maybe. But it was my first impression of hearing Japanese spoken was, this is the most unnatural thing I've ever heard in my life. This sounds like insects talking. I remember thinking, this is like insects talking. I don't know what I meant by that, but that was sort of the unnatural sound that it had. But then you get into it, and now it's just a different way of saying the same thing. I don't have any, for most of the time, unless there's a particular vocabulary item that I'm not familiar with, like, I don't know, oxidative phosphorylation or something, which I don't sort of off the top of my head know how you say that in Japanese, although I could probably figure it out. But it's just another medium now. I'm completely sort of comfortable with it, and I don't think of it as another language. It's just something I can switch into. I mean, I could.
But Simon, you must have ESP, because I was just about to say to you, could you say one line in Japanese to us? And I was going to say, it's a different way of saying the same thing in Japanese to us, just so that we can hear what you were talking about.
Okay.
And then you said, I suppose I could translate this line. Before I asked you, you said that the minute I was thinking it. So there's this conceptual continuity line going from Ottawa, Canada to England to Venice, California. It's like electron. But just say that or something in Japanese so we can hear what you're talking.
違う言葉というよりも、なんかもう同じ言葉で、っていうか、同じものを違う形で言うだけであって、結果的にもうジェリーの頭の中に同じ印象を受けてるわけ。もし日本語わかるんだったら、わからないと思うから。Sorry, that's quite enough.
Now, what did you say? What did that insect
it's not
say?
two different languages. It's just two different ways of saying the same thing, and the effect of it is the same. Whatever I'm saying is going into your head in just the same way if you understood Japanese, which is at the point where I realized you don't understand Japanese. So therefore, It isn't. But if you did, it's just there's no this whole thing about different languages. Oh, they have different ways of talking about things and blah 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 blah. Yeah, superficially that's true, but ultimately it's not true at all. You can say exactly the same thing. I mean, I spent a lot of my life doing simultaneous interpreting, and it's just sort of you step into a field between the two languages and just feel it. It's about feeling totally. I hear something in English, I feel it, and then I explain that feeling in the other language. That's all. I'm not dealing with words at all. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a slight exaggeration, but in terms of my
No, it's good. Simon, it's good because I often say the Aborigines in Australia have no word for boredom. Does
yeah,
that mean they never get bored? No,
it's
they
probably
get bored.
yeah, of course they
Do
do.
they get, yeah, they get bored, but they just have a different word for it or a different
Well,
feeling for it.
or we may not know what their word for boredom is. It's just sort of. I'm sure they do have a word for it. Well, they might
But
not.
here's Nick, I wanted to go back because when you said animals are aware, all living things are aware, but we're different because we have consciousness.
Yeah.
Just to go back to that for a second, to me, that's anthropomorphizing the animals that they have a word for aware. It's us going, we know what awareness is in humans, and we see this pattern in animals, and they must be aware. Like my puppy loves me because he looks at me with puppy eyes, and that's love. I goes, you don't know that's love. He's just saying, give me food, but we want to anthropomorphize. But what it leads to is more so, you both can tackle this, is the brain detecting consciousness or creating consciousness? Is consciousness thus there bubbling away and we're sort of like tuning into it like the antenna of the race, or are we actually creating consciousness?
Can I move that back in an even further radical
Sure.
sort of?
Yeah.
Does rust feel? Okay, so
Wow. So you, yeah.
this is sort of where I'm at the moment. I'm writing an essay, trying to write an essay called "Rust, Superglue, and the Origin of Life," which
That's good.
because it's about. I mean, it's really interesting because in a sense, if you've got oxygen, iron, and water around, they're spontaneously going to rust. Nobody's forcing them to do this. They're just going to do it. And the reason they are is because it is thermodynamically
Mhm,
more favorable for
mhm,
them. They
mhm,
feel more comfortable that way.
mhm.
Now you can call that anthropomorphism or whatever, but I found this guy who's absolutely fantastic. I mean, I found him. He's known. This guy called Nick Lane, who is a microbiologist, and he writes about these things. And I was delighted to discover that he talks about it in terms of desire. It is as if the oxygen and the iron desire each other. They really do need to come together because they feel more comfortable that way. All these the elements that we are surrounded with, they're all out of balance to a certain extent. So,
Entropy as love.
well, kind of, yes. So, uh, if you're going to say rust spontaneously does that, I mean, and like super glue, it's basically you open the cap, it gets water out of the air and just goes because it wants to, right? So, is it feeling that? If not, why not? Where does feeling, where does awareness, where is awareness separated from spontaneous behavior that you see in organic, what we call inorganic materials? I don't know. I think awareness is just the spontaneous behavior that we do as a result from the sensory input that we have, and the sensory input itself is a chemical reaction. At the end of the day, light hitting my retina and going through all the way it goes through. It's a thermodynamically sort of favorable reaction. So am I feeling that? Yes, I'm feeling it. Am I feeling it because I have language? I don't think so. I think that your dog, whether he's looking at you, he may not be loving you in quite the way that you want him to, but he's certainly feeling something. If not, you're going down Descartes' route, and I don't think that's,
Mm.
you know.
Hmm.
I think we're wiser than that now.
We've inadvertently picked up computer metaphors in contemporary neuroscience, trying to describe the mind.
Yeah,
Right, the same way, the humors are inspired by aqueducts, humor theory, or drives from steam engines and pressures building up. Right, so now we use terms like input and output, or information processing, and we think of information, or the flow of information, like it's some sort of etheric material which actually flows through wires or across the planet. Right, the idea of memes as an organism implies there's this zeitgeist. Right, right, there's a mainstream, as the mainstream media, the largest zeitgeist. Right, this implicit sensory reification of information as a flowing substance, of the sort we imagine is happening in a computer, because we don't get a feel that the computer is digitizing, and just it's this flat circuit of switches changing like clockwork, like railway switches to the beat of a clock. Beat, 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 switch, switch, switch. There's no information or content in a computer. There is no input or output.
right.
When we say input or output, the computer would be a deterministic closed machine going in a loop if there wasn't this keyboard that let me interrupt its
Yeah,
determinism. And now its system gets scrambled by my input, and then the output, right, thus is scrambled in a way which is meaningful to me. But so when we think of the mind and we think of senses, I always want to, qualify conversations that use input output sensory information with. You have to understand that there's no content in a computer, there's no cyberspace. Right, a computer file is not real. Your resume in your word processor is not identical to the piece of paper that came out of your printer, where there's one identity shared between the virtual representation. Right, there's no piece of paper in your computer, it just looks like that way in the WYSIWYG paradigm that some
right,
artist came up to sell computers to
right.
grandmas who didn't want to learn how to program. So yeah, so I'm always it's useful to talk about sensory input, but I think it elides a great deal of more holistic coexistence of our sensory being in touch with the exterior world, and our embodied co-creation of what's happening outside of us and also inside of us, in this sort of bootstrapped. Right, how does my image of the world determine what I do to adjust it, and how does what's outside. Right, there's like this circular logic where the very flow of time is
Mm,
is the negotiation between my sensory imagination of the exterior and what the exterior actually is,
mm.
and my body as a mediating form. So I
Yeah.
think you're right. Absolutely. Just be careful not to think of eyes and senses as these flowing circuits of information. Right, that ends up.
No, then no, but they are. But they nonetheless, if you look at the evolutionary development of all the senses that we now have, I mean, take the eye for example. I mean, it starts out as a light-sensitive patch of skin, right?
Mhm.
That sort of, and I think what is it, 50 different ways that the eye has evolved in all the
Oh, the
different species.
octopus went and innovated its own eye, all on its own stream, completely different from ours, that sort of
Absolutely,
thing.
absolutely. And then well, octopus intelligence. We could talk about that, for example, which is appears to it's an analogous form of intelligence that has come through a completely different evolutionary route. I mean, obviously there is a common ancestor way back in a long time ago, but okay. So the eye, what is the eye? The eye is a means of sensing light, and at the very primitive level, it's about just being able to move into the light so that you can photosynthesize better, or whatever it is that you can do. You benefit from being able to know where the light is and move towards it.
Mhm.
So at that point, that's almost a kind of just a chemical reaction level. But nonetheless, does that being that is sensing the light and therefore moves towards the light, Is it
Right.
feeling it, or what? Or is it just a chemical reaction? And if it isn't, when does it start becoming
Right.
awareness?
How abstracted does our contribution to the hastened entropy of the universe become until it's no longer just a chemical reaction? We go and we pull oil out of the ground to burn it for the sake of driving a car, just for a continued extended extrapolation of the same basic chemical reaction drive.
Yeah,
Yeah, the thermodynamic coherence of the entire universe is, becoming ever more refined within our minds and their chaos.
yeah. It's sort of like an arms race in a way. It's sort of we're just becoming ratcheting up in the same way that multicellular organisms ratchet themselves up because somebody developed a tooth. So then you need a hard shell to stop yourself being eaten by the thing with the tooth, and then it goes on and on and on and on. But is this ultimately just a sort of the inevitability of thermodynamic sort of plausibility,
Mhm,
or what? That's the interesting thing. But I think there is nonetheless, to go back to the thing about language. There is language allows us to tag it. We can if I mean Chomsky's making this thing now. He's saying language is just about thought. It wasn't anything to do with communication. It was all about thought, which strikes me as kind of weird. I can't really follow him down that route, and I can't follow him down a lot of routes actually. But
mhm,
it seems that whether or not that was its original purpose, being able to tag using noises to tag something allows you to think about stuff this in a way that an animal without language is going to struggle to do. You can be aware of things. I mean, a squirrel can be aware of maybe 10,000 places that it's hidden
mhm.
all its nuts, right? But
Maybe the tagging is a side effect of the purpose of communication as co-thinking or coexisting.
yeah, but
Uh,
tagging is the means by which we can do that.
yeah, but
If
if an animal grunts in pain and the
mm,
other animal senses,
yeah,
vicariously through empathy the pain, and then through it, they both.
the grunt is a tag. The grunt is a if it didn't grunt, the other animal wouldn't know.
Right. Well, it's an expression of a state of being I'm
Ooh,
feeling, and then what it
yeah.
is that's causing that state of being becomes we tag the thing in the environment that right.
I mean,
The
I
lion
once
lifts its
spent
paw to show the mouse the thorn.
I once spent a really interesting hour watching a sheep on a hill in Cheltenham where I was living, and it was like there was a mother sheep and like an adolescent child sheep, and the young lamb was trying to get away and explore, and the mother was going meh, and it was like come back, and and the lamb was going meh, meaning no, I don't want to. It's like meh. No, they spent about an hour mehing at each other, and it was clearly a conversation was going on of some kind,
Mhm.
but it wasn't very. They weren't talking quantum physics. They weren't even talking sort of basically what's for dinner tonight. It was just you can't get very far with that kind of thing. You can only that's why phonemes essentially putting these sounds together in combinations that allows you to make as many words as you fucking want. That's the key. That's the key to language. The grammar is like icing on the cake. Jerry, sorry, I
Yeah.
just ranted.
No, that was brilliant because you guys brought up so much, but I wanted to go back to that. And again, you must have ESP, Simon, because you went right to it when I thought it was. It seemed as though you were saying earlier that word is ear and grammar is eye. Now that could,
Sorry,
I'm not
word
sure
is what?
word is more ear oriented and
Okay.
grammar is more eye oriented, like the way it's put together, like the sentence is put together is the grammar, whereas the word is like more of an ear thing. Maybe that's not true, but you can get to that. And let me just say my little bit here is T.S. Eliot said, when I talk to you, I got to use words. Now, we don't. We can listen to a Brazilian song without, or tuba throat singers without knowing the words and be moved emotionally.
Yeah.
That's, we can even imagine they're saying something and it's moving me emotionally. So we can't separate thinking from feeling, which again, at the beginning, you said this amazing thing. You said that mind body crap, which I would love for you to describe that, because we can separate the mind from the body because we invented words and go,
Yes.
that's the body and
Yes.
that's the mind. But we can't, but we can't separate things in general because they're so complexly interconnected. But with words, we can. So thinking and feeling is a lot of what you guys were talking about brilliantly. And I found that my question was often in the past, can you think without language? And most people go, well, it varies, but I think about 80% of people say yes. So in the midst of you guys talking, I came up with the new question. You can handle it as you will and go on, because I'm a student of all this and I'm learning a lot. Can you feel without language?
Yeah. That's what we're talking about. That feeling is awareness in my sense of it. That's the rust. You know, that's the squirrel who's hungry. You know, it's sort of, it's feeling is what we all have. Any living thing, and maybe not even living things. I don't know. Maybe rust feels
Like rocks and like they say rocks have feelings too. But this is what you're saying is not awareness and not consciousness. You're saying that's awareness, that's
yes,
feeling. Then
yes.
what's the difference?
Can you think? Can you think without language? Well, let's go to that, because I mean, thinking. Yes, you can. I mean, you look at animals, the way they behave, they clearly do think. They're thinking forward to, you know, they plan things. There's this amazing story that Darwin tells in The Descent of Man, I think it is, where he talks about this this monkey he's been watching in Gibraltar, and the monkey has been like one of the officers in the military base there has sort of kicked the monkey or done something, and the monkey's got a grudge on the officer, and he waits until they're on parade somewhere, and as the officer comes by, he splashes water. The monkey splashes water and mud all over the officer, and runs away, and sort of goes like that. So that's thinking. You know, that's definite evidence. But as Frank said, you know, you can't hum the news. Do you remember him saying that?
But tell us what you think that means. I'm not sure.
Well, he was talking about in the context, and what I mean by it is that, you know, you can only go so far. Yes, you can think without language, but you can't think very much. Now, language gives you the tools to infinitely expand the number of items that you can tag with and in your awareness. I mean, words are really just about differentiating stuff in your head.
When we use words for, say, syllogistically or conceptually, that might be true, but you could probably hum James Joyce, Finnegan's Wake.
I could, but whether you would understand what I meant by that is another matter. You know, I mean, I could. This is the thing. I mean, the words give me the ability to precisely indicate what I mean, and you may not understand it in the same way. You know, nobody may understand each other 100%, but it gives me substantially better tools to do it than anybody who can't speak. I mean, if you just think of a situation where you're with somebody who doesn't speak your language very well, it's really difficult. I mean, I don't know if you've been in that situation much, but it's hard.
It's right. Yes. Enough times. I mean,
not if you have a cell phone now. You just in the cell phone, you go, "Where's the
Oh,
bus?"
I know
And you
now.
hit a
Yeah.
button and it goes, yeah. So who needs that a translator
Work,
anymore? You could
work,
do it.
Working
But you
customer
still,
service at an international airport, I found myself constantly trying to communicate across language barriers.
yeah.
And I also had a deaf friend who would come by who had mostly pantomime with.
Oh, okay, yes.
So I can relate to the attempts to close communication in lieu in a facet of varieties there, many facets.
But nonetheless, if you don't speak the same language as the person, be it sign language or any other language, if you are not fluent in their language
Right.
and they're not fluent in yours,
Hmm.
there's a real limit to what you can say. And I mean, nobody could participate in this conversation, for example,
Certainly,
unless they had a
certainly not.
fairly good command of English.
So if there are things that are engineered that can be described to perfection. If
Yeah,
the three-stroke, right, the combustion cycle of a three-stroke engine or something like this, right? All right, right, all sorts of machines in which you can precisely articulate within the confines of the formal system, which is a closed system, to precisely encapsulate
hmm,
every functioning element to its parameters to perfectly, right? This is
right,
engineering and science. To
right.
bring it back to your initial dilemma of having to be forced to choose. And
Yeah,
the way
okay.
language works in engineering and science, people are so used to and become comfortable with being able to put things with precision, meaning only one pole of precision, which is as precise as possible. And when
Yeah.
artists use language, they're practicing how to speak with precision, but the other pole of precision, how to speak as vaguely and ambiguously and all inclusively as possible in a simultaneous all at onceness, where you're trying to speak a dream language that might speak to everyone differently through the tightest, where a poem is like the tightest compression of words that can say as much as possible in the most
Hmm,
parsimonious, resonant
hmm.
sense, right? So,
But nonetheless, the a poet will spend, you know, an almost infinite amount of time sometimes to get those words exactly right. I mean, it's almost like a sort of a like an enzyme, if you like, that it's just sort of it's got to be exactly the right shape to hold together those molecules of consciousness that allow an understanding to be formed through it.
mhm.
There's a precision about poetry. I would say that's kind of analogous in that way. I mean, it's sort of at least in terms of the intent of the person who's writing it. Of
Well,
course,
it's funny you said it. The precision is analogous.
yeah,
You are actually literally trying to collapse as many metaphors as possible within a single utterance, right?
yes, yes.
Like the canary in Plato's coal mine cave or something, right? You're trying to trying to pull as much stuff as possible in the tightest utterance. It is a matter of precision as to be as vague as possible.
Right.
Yeah, let me just
Just to
say
go
that
back
thing,
to right.
bringing up the wake, just really quick, bringing up the wake. We read the wake last night in this amazing group based in Austin, Texas, but the people are everywhere in the world. It is the wake, and it has
Right.
nothing to do, in my opinion. I always go, there's no content. It's just us on Zoom and talking. And all of a sudden, and I've learned so much about the wake from this, all of a sudden, the whole page is about farting. And I didn't know there's a lot of farting in Finnegan's Wake, and I didn't know this. And I know a little about the wake just to talk about it at cocktail parties, but I'm like just amazed. And then for 30 minutes, everybody went into the history of farting in their family, in their dad. And I told my whole fart lexicon, like everything about farting in my family, Tim Carey, Marlon Brando,
I
Salvador Dali.
I don't
It's
know whether to say if I'm sorry I missed it.
but then this is nothing. So one time, one of the scholars there told me, "Oh yeah, in the wake, the guy takes his poop and he writes on his skin."
Oh,
It's like we don't need no printed paper. We can use poop on our skin to write things. And I'm like, do people know this? Like, you're trying to impress people. Like, do you want to read highbrow literature with us? What's it about? Oh, writing poop on your skin, I'm in. That sounds great.
Jerry,
But
you're gonna have to retool your questions about cave art now. How are they doing it?
yeah, but it is amazing that you can recognize what he did with those words. But one other thing, sorry to divert, is T.S. Eliot said that poetry, because I'm glad you brought that up. Clinton brought up art, and then you brought up poetry, which was like, and T.S. Eliot said that poetry is outing your inner dialogue. So is the inner dialogue, which I ask people, I go, what language is your inner dialogue in? It's easy to go English, French, whatever. That's their inner dialogue. And they don't get, my question is really, what form is your inner consciousness in? And they'll go TV commercials, or, they'll say music, So what, when we say inner dialogue, that word implies language, but is language words? And then it implies, oh, in order to answer that, I got to use language. So we could just gesture this whole Zoom together, or we could just blink our eyes or write. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, in order to communicate what you are thinking, communicate the internal dialogue, you've got to use words. I mean, or sign language or something. You've got to use an articulated system that works grammatically, and you've got to do that. Doesn't mean that that's what's going on in your head, though. I found there was this fantastic expression that was used by a Japanese translator who I worked with once, and he talked about the process of translation and what's going on when you're doing that. He called it the descent into wordlessness. And I think that is a fantastic expression, which is exactly right. Because if you want to translate something well, you've kind of got to really forget about the words that they're using. You've got to go, where is this taking me? The actual, if it's printed words on the page, or if it's just this, the words that somebody's speaking, it's sort of, you've got to go deep into yourself and find that thing that, in a way, it's a little dance. Words are just a little dance that you put together that comes out in sounds, but actually it's a feeling somewhere deep inside. There's a feeling, and then you've got to kind of grasp that feeling, and then find a way of making that feeling come out using a different system, different words. So the descent into wordlessness, it's like, okay, I've read this thing, okay, chuck the words away. I don't need to see the words anymore. I'm going to come out with that same sensation, if you like. This is very precisely articulated sensation, though it was when it was on the page. I've got to take that and put it into another medium, essentially.
Yeah. 1 second to clarify. Your friend said that translating is the descent into wordlessness.
Yes. Well, in the act of translating, you have to, enter into the descent into wordlessness. Yeah.
Yeah, that was good, because Gary Snyder, the beat poet who's sort of still alive, and he's ecologically minded, he said, my task as a poet entails the work of seeing the world without language, then bringing that seeing into language.
Yes.
And so
it seems like neurotics would be terrible translators.
Yes, I think that's right.
So Simon, tell us, because I love this story. You are what like one of the greatest translators in the world for Japanese. You got Kubrick, George Harrison, Yoko. You got what a lineup of people you've worked with, and what a life. You got lucky, and you're talented, but you're in between. You're in that in betweenness. And my favorite was when the Japanese person's asking George Harrison about all this music, and then the Japanese guy goes, well, what should we ask him, Simon? And you go, well, ask him if he liked Frank Zappa. So you got to do something personal. But one story you told me, which might illustrate what's going on, is you had to translate live in front of an auditorium with a bunch of Japanese people, and then the person speaking in English, and then you're over there doing it live. And then there was like one moment where everybody in the auditorium who are Japanese sort of knew you flubbed a hair.
Yeah.
Or there was, yeah. So talk about that. I mean, that was your feeling. Is that totally grammar thing or totally a feeling thing? I mean, what's the, how do you navigate that in the world of translation?
I think the story you're talking about probably is where I was translating for this famous architect, and Tadao Ando, if you know the guy. And anyway, he was telling the story, and he said something that I didn't quite catch, because he's got a very strong accent. It's like he's from Detroit or something. It's like kind of, it's not a standard. And he started, the more excited he got, the more he realized that the audience was understanding what he was saying. That he got more and more excited. He got more Detroit, if that's the right. Anyway, so he said something, and said, so one day this guy came to my office. It's like, what? So what came into the office? And I thought, in the context of what he was saying, I thought, because you're in front of a live audience, you've got to say something. So, and half the time you can sort of kind of go where he's going. So I said, so one day this new job came into the office, and he just turned to me and he said, what about the dog? And it was like, what dog? Oh, that was the word he said that I didn't catch. So I had to sort of stop and say, oh, sorry, what he actually said was dog. I misheard him. You just have to deal with it. And that's fine.
Right.
But
right, but it is. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but it's sort of like you could have said, "Excuse me, I didn't hear that. Say that again," and you just went with the flow because you thought he just said, "Yeah."
Well, it's generally better to sort of just keep going with it, because people just, I think there's some statistic about 50% of what we say is redundant, and people only hear 20% of what you say anyway. So that's basically, at the end of the day, you're only dealing with 10% of actually what's going on. And it's more important to create the sense of confidence in the audience than anything else. If you keep going, sorry, what did you say? Then it's like the audience is going to go, shit, he doesn't know anything. And it's just sense. It's a psychological thing that as an interpreter you have to kind of just take chances with, and
just roll with it.
Right, which brings up a key thing that I wanted to talk about was how do I get back to gallery?
Oh,
I did something
bottom right.
It's the bottom right. The 4 little squares. See?
Oh, I'm sorry. Look at how stupid I am. I wanted to ask you both.
I learned that.
What caused individualism? Go ahead. Because what caused individualism? Because if like my friend said, the oldest word is you, and he said the act of pointing with your finger, because this is something that the Eastern philosophy says. Don't mistake the finger pointing at the moon for the moon.
For the moon, right.
Like, if I'm pointing at the moon, are you looking at my finger or are you looking at the moon? So it's sort of like
he's looking at your finger. That's the interesting thing.
But,
there's a clear point in child development where a baby gets pointing.
I remember a memory when I was young of noticing that when people were pointing at a thing, it wasn't at the tip of their finger, but I had to assume their vantage point.
You remember that?
No, what I
Wow.
remember was trying to adjust my finger so that it would overlap in their vision the thing I was pointing at, and I was pointing the wrong way because I wasn't pointing at the thing from my perspective. I was trying to put my finger in front of their field of vision to overlap what I recalled that doing it, and I recalled being frustrated that no one I was pointing better than they were, and they couldn't even figure out that I was pointing better than they were ever pointing at anything before because I was doing it right. My finger was actually on top of the thing I was gesturing from their point of view.
How
I don't know,
old
I
are
was
you
like
at this
4 or
point, do you
something,
think?
3 or 4. I
Yeah, yeah,
remember
yeah.
feeling very smart and then feeling very pissed off no one got it because I was never actually pointing at what it is I was trying to show them.
Wow.
But you
That
see
reminds me
what
of,
I'm trying. Yeah, go ahead, Simon.
I was just going to say that reminds me of something in Japan where the center of pointing is different. And I remember being very confused with that. People would point at my, I can't remember what it was now. It was that they would point at my head rather than my chest. And sorry, this is a bad story because I can't remember what it was, but I do remember that there's different cultures. It's like everything else. There's a different
Yeah,
way of doing it. Yeah.
but it's sort of like this thing. What I think that Eastern proverb, "Don't mistake the finger pointing at the moon for the moon," is sort of like McLuhan saying there's content and there's form.
Right.
And we usually sort of lean more towards the content than the form. He never said they're one's more important than the other. Or no, he it seems as though he said that one's more important than the
But
other. But
words are the finger that is pointing, right? That's what words are.
yeah, and so we want to try to balance the content and the form and get both of them. Because so when my friend told me that you may be the oldest word in the language, so I looked it up in etymology, but he also said that pointing the index finger with the index finger and recognizing another person is sort of the first thing or one of the first things humans do. There's my mother, and I'm going to get milk from her. And it goes along with a thing we talk about a lot with Jay also is that the sustained gaze is the first human invention. The sustained gaze. So keeping in mind those three things, sustained gaze, you, and pointing finger, I looked up you in etymology this morning, and it sent me to this word ye, Y-E, which means the, which came from the. I don't mean. It's what it's rooted in etymologically. And ye, Y-E, is rooted in the word we. So I'm just curious,
Oh, wow.
what caused, yeah, and then everybody's talking in these last 2 weeks, everybody's talking, well, that caused individualism. Like, what caused individualism? We're all one collective consciousness. We're all one human being. We're all one Zoom. When we
Before
have,
the
Yeah,
fall,
but I
eh?
can't eat I can't eat your lunch. I mean, you can't eat my lunch. I got to eat for myself. You got to eat
yeah,
for yourself. It's about survival, isn't it? I mean, that's all it is.
that's the bottom line you're saying. Yeah,
I think so. Yeah.
yeah,
I think we differentiate as individuals because um, we that that's how you survive.
yeah.
You can't eat for me. I got to eat for me.
I almost want to
Whereas
bring
we can have a collective we can share our consciousness here, but we can't share our food in that way. I mean, in terms of I've got to eat my food, you've got to eat your food.
see, this brings me to a funny tragedy of the
Yeah.
commons sort of idea
Yeah,
of of co- collective maybe entropy demands that we all cooperate so as to consume things faster as a team as opposed to
yes,
the
I
self-interested
think it does. Have you read this? There's an amazing book called Super Collaborators
no, I haven't.
by this guy called oh geez, name's got it out of my head. Blah, 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 blah. It's a
Well,
really
we can look
interesting.
it up.
You can look it up. Super Corporators. Martin Novak.
Great.
Nowak. He's, I think, Austrian originally. Um, And he's essentially sort of making the point that although evolution is sort of traditionally thought of as being about competition, it's the survival of the fittest. It's actually the cooperative strategies are in fact um, the more productive ones when it comes down to it. But you still got to survive to
Hmm.
be able to cooperate, I guess.
I'm.
Now he said a really interesting. Now, this is a bit of a diversion here, but Martin Novak, I read about him when I was writing my a paper on language, and he's done some really interesting sort of statistical work about the evolution of language. But anyway, I knew about him, and I'd read this book, The Super Collaborators, Super Cooperators, possibly it's called. And then when the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing blew up, I was just curious to know, why, who were these people that, because he'd when they identified Prince Andrew as being one of the guys that he'd been temping for or whatever, they also one of the names that came up was Marvin Minsky. You
Yeah.
know who he is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was one of the guys. I was thinking, wait a sec, Prince Andrew. I can understand, a teenage girl possibly going, oh yeah, and he introduced me to Prince Andrew. I mean, that's sort of on the scale of
Hmm.
possible fantasies, but a young sort of girl basically coming from a broken home with no education, being able to say Marvin Minsky. I mean, the chances of her knowing who he was are zero to vanishing. It's sort of, and so I thought, hang on a sec, what's going on? So I looked into it a bit, and I discovered that this guy Martin Novak had also known Epstein, and Epstein had funded his research at
Hmm.
Harvard. This is all. There's no suggestion that he was sort of part of this kind of pedo ring thing,
Yeah.
because Epstein was using all the money that he'd sort of stolen from people
Right.
to he was sort of rinsing it through Harvard. He was making himself look good by funding all this research. But Novak, oh that's right, no sorry, it's in the book itself, the Super Corporators book. He says, I was on this island with Jeffrey Epstein where he used to
Oh.
have all these conferences, and it's true, he did. This is
Yeah.
where the Marvin Minsky thing came from. And
Yeah.
he said that I'm sitting down with and Epstein, he said, was really interested in his research, and they used to sit together and discuss things. And so he was making the point about evolution. He said, so what if everything is about finding a solution to a problem? What is the problem to which life is the solution? This is Epstein said this.
Ah.
What is the problem to which life is the solution? And I thought that's an amazing way of thinking about it. That really does cut through the whole thing. And this is where we come back to thermodynamic, plausibility and stuff. It is sort of,
Yeah. The thermodynamic. Um. The reduction of human and of humanity and all of our romanticism about which can then be swept away with a purely materialistic explanation for everything, and then you can lead on to dreams of transhuman immortality or life in a computer or other such
mm,
things that
mm,
large in the fringier cybernetic neuroscientific absolute reductionism to materialism, which allows for someone like Epstein to feel entitled to take liberties of a sort that he can then justify old romantic notions about the sanctity of life and whatnot. It's easier to write that shit off when you're a materialist to that degree, right? I
mm,
understand that, of course, all the smartest people in the world, try to network and are organized. There's a guy, John Brockman, runs the Edge Institute, who
yes,
was
I know.
very closely affiliated with, right? So, like, the idea of, yes, philanthropists try to get all the smart people together to solve humanity's big problems, right?
Mm,
It's a noble philanthropic goal on the cover,
mm,
and then so I mean, I just know about Minsky in particular because in the free software community, Richard Stallman tried very hard to defend Minsky's good name and reputation against um, unnecessary, right? The so regardless, that whole fair aside, I do think that there's something substantial to the proclivity to write off the value or the sanctity of human life when you get too materialist reductionist to explanations of chemical thermodynamics as the baseline for all of existence, right? There's a very, very tricky, hard question to try and shine a light on the mysteries of
Okay,
being without.
yeah, and I understand what you're saying, but I think the whole notion of it being reductionist is based on the notion that somehow mind body, there is this mind body split, and that
Oh,
we're trying to explain it all in terms of the body and not in terms of the mind. But there is no split. It's the same. You know, the mind is an aspect of the body. I think, but that's my take on it. That it's not a
mhm.
reductionist thing. It's an inclusive thing. It's including
That's
mind
why
within the body.
That's
But
why I like
nonetheless,
McLuhan's notion of all of our utterances and outerances of extensions of our body. And
right.
so that includes our total environment and the tools we wield and the habitats we create and the languages we use as further extensions of our body and ourselves.
Hmm.
Our mind is thus embodied in the material output and wielding and the agglomerations onto our being in a physical and symbolic sense, or want of a better
Hmm.
term, right? Yeah.
But language is the breakout point. Language is the
Hmm.
singularity that allows us to really make real the idea that we are all one consciousness. I mean, the fact that we can sit here and just do this now is entirely due to language. And we could be sitting in the same room, but if we didn't share a language, we'd be really hard pressed to really share much in the way of our inner world. But right now, you know, I'm able to, you know, get a fairly clear idea of what you're thinking about these things, and just by virtue of making some digitized grunts. You know, I mean, you can call that reductionism if you like, but when it comes down to it, that's what it is. It's just a very I'm speaking of language specifically now, but it's
Hmm.
just um, making a very small number of noises and putting them together and using that as a tagging system, as I said before. But that
So,
allows me then to tap into your mind.
mhm.
You know, we're basically throwing a net over our minds and allowing us to sort of just play with it. You know.
So, in your role as translator, I suppose it's sort of like you have three roles at the same time because you're like a hole in the wall through which two people are talking through you, and then also you're like a fly on the wall watching this conversation between two people
Mm-hmm.
who are probably trying to look each other in the eye, and you're like sort of coming obliquely whispering in their ear back and forth,
That's
sort of deal,
exactly
right?
what happens. I mean, that's the ideal scenario. It's sometimes difficult to get people to do that, especially people who are not used to working with a translator. But I'm happiest when I can see that my two protagonists are just literally talking, as if you and I were talking, but
Mhm.
because I'm able to just supply the missing language in the ear of the person who's not talking, then it becomes seamless. That's the ideal. You
Mhm.
rarely reach that sort of, you know,
And so,
that high level, but
in that synergy, I want to ask,
I'm
where do
not
you
there.
go? Where do you go
I'm not there.
when
That's what I
you're
was just
not
going to
there?
say. I'm not there.
Mhm.
Ideally, I'm not there because when I'm speaking, I, as much as I can realistically be, I am that person. I take on, I, you know, almost have to kind of suppress myself sometimes with mannerisms and things, but I'm sort of, you know,
Mm.
I'm trying to speak with the same feeling that that person is speaking. I'm representing that person. So I'm me, Simon. I'm not there in my own
Mhm.
conception of it. Because if you are there, you can't do the job. You've got to be not there. You've got to just to do it properly. You've got to have no judgment, no any sense of filtering anything. You've just got to go. That's just been said, and this is how you say it. You know, there's no kind of sort of
Mhm.
um, there's no you that gets in the way.
It
That
just
is that's amazing. Let me just interject because Clinton, you got to say two of them: a hole in the wall, a fly on the wall, and I was going to add whatever your third is. Tell us. a fly in the soup, because the difference between cinema verite and direct cinema is this funny thing. One of them is you're the fly on the wall. It's observational cinema. The other one is you're a fly in the soup. You're putting yourself in the documentary a little, and so people like, you should just like be the observer. So there's this debate in documentary talk where, are you a fly on the wall or a fly in the soup? And so that's like great, because you are a vehicle, but there is still Simon there. He's still there, as opposed to being Jerry's the vehicle or Clinton's the vehicle. Simon's the vehicle, and you've learned how to do that. But what I again was amazed at how you brought up that problem and solution thing, because right at the top of this page of prep notes for today, I put this Gregory Bateson quote, an anthropologist, and my friend paraphrased. He says, "The problem can't arise without a solution, without the solution." And I'm not sure exactly if that's what Bateson says, but the one I always repeat is, there's no solution because there's no problem. That's Duchamp. And that's that's Pollyanna. So you guys can go whatever, any way you want, but I love to ask people this one. Was 2020 really, oh, it's so challenging a year. It's so difficult times. I mean, to me, it's turned all my meetings into Zoom meetings, and they're way better. Now, of course, I'm spoiled because I can ride my bike to the beach every day and still see people 6 feet away, sort of talk, enjoy the world. But, there's confinement that a lot of people have to experience more than others. But in the general picture, is this the human condition? Is conflict breakdown the human condition? And there's no measuring it. The cave people had it just as bad or good as we do, and we have it just as bad or good as they do. Is there really this, oh, it's difficult times? Like, is that resonate for you guys at all?
It wasn't particularly difficult for me because I live my life at home, and my wife and I just sort of a self-contained unit most of the time. So the only thing I've really felt marginally inconvenient is the ability to go out and I see a film or go to a restaurant or do some sort of kind of analog thing that you can't really do like this. I miss that to some extent, but difficult. It's nothing like being in Myanmar right now, or living through Syria, anything like that. That's difficult.
Yeah.
This is just kind of like, a bit annoying, but I mean, I live in my head anyway most of the time, so I'm quite comfortable there.
Right. It's been frustrating for me because I've been precisely 2020 was the year where I was getting out of my head.
Oh, wow.
Well, it's funny because I was always an internet junkie since waking up at 3 a.m. every morning before elementary school to use dial-up internet without getting kicked off because mom has to use the phone or is expecting a phone call or something, right?
Right.
But the participation in text-based conversations for the good 15 years of my development, where no one knows how old you are, you're just a line of words and you type quickly and you're having all these conversations with people you don't know how old they are or how smart they are, right? So existing in that state without point of reference to age or identity of your interlocutors and learning language in this way, it makes you very awkward in the flesh, right? I'm a very awkward person to talk to, right, much less so lately. It's generally, but so 2020 was a very frustrating year for being sort of thrown back into emailing people and writing letters when precisely all I wanted to do was go get lots more FaceTime. Now this is a good compromise. It's still not ideal,
No.
but I think starting a YouTube channel and having interesting conversations like this, I'll admit half of it was sort of the therapeutic exposure therapy to to embodied speech to slow down the neuroticism or to ameliorate the mind body split, so to say.
Right.
That's why I sort of have that very conceptualized, a very structured approach to
But right there,
conceptualizing.
you're kind of like you're describing exactly what language brings to the party. I mean, you would have. It's You're describing almost the ultimate abstraction of language. I mean, normally, I mean, as language arose, it was about systematizing grunts between people who existed, and before writing was there, it was just literally a dance of noise that we did with each other that allowed us. But it, by virtue of the fact that it's tagging something, it creates a mental world where
Hmm.
you can populate this world with vocabulary. That's really the wrong word. I don't want to use that word, but that is what it is. I mean, it's with a whole sort of
Hmm.
you can tag these things that you can think about, and that means that you can actually take away everything and just exist in that total abstract space in theory.
Hmm.
But we do belong to a body. I've got this thing that's going to go. I need to eat in a minute, or I got to go and pee, or whatever it is, and that's that comes with. So you've got to kind of learn to handle the two together, I suppose. But that to me was going back to Aikido, which I was talking about at the beginning. That was the how the East shook the West for me, was that it was about seeing that the two are so intimately entwined, and in particular, just one aspect of it, that because before I discovered Aikido, I was reading a lot of psychology and just sort of trying to unfuck myself, as it were, and sort of figure out why I was so fucked up. And I don't know if you've ever read anything by Reich, Wilhelm Reich. Do you know about him?
Yeah.
Oh, a little bit,
He
like
was one of
orgone.
Freud's. What?
Is that the
He was
orgone guy?
Yes, the orgone
Yeah.
guy. Unfortunately, he got that. That was
Mhm.
how it all went, wrong for him. But one of his big things. I mean, it was sort of basically sex therapy, which is already getting slightly dodgy. But nonetheless, the thing he took from Freud as one of his disciples. They all took different things. It's a bit like the blind man and the elephant, sort of. But his thing was, rather than working on the head, he discovered in his practice that the people who were sort of psychologically distressed expressed that through their body, and specifically through their ability to have an orgasm, a fully satisfying orgasm. And so his thing was about the body, working on the body to liberate the mind. Now, in Aikido, it was exactly the same thing. It was like when you're sort of sparring with somebody, the whole thing is about learning to relax. So when somebody comes at you, instead of going "fuck," somebody's coming at you, you just got to calmly, coolly step out of the way. And you tend to sort of raise your shoulders up like this. I was constantly being told, "Relax your shoulders, no strength, use ki," sort of. And I found that as I learned to do this, as I learned to relax my body, as I learned to just sort of feel a holistic being, I think is the best way of putting it. Instead of, this is my arm and I'm going to hit you with my fist, it's like, no, the whole of me is going to interact with you with the whole of me. This then, as I became integrated in my body, I found that I was less fucked up. It just sort of cleared my mind in some way that I can't articulate particularly, but I do remember thinking, this is it. This is the thing. This is the mind-body thing is an illusion. They are. One is an aspect of the other. And if you're fucked up in your head, you'll be fucked up in your body, and vice versa, because they are aspects of each other.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I've gone off on one, but
No, you really brought it full circle so well, because I took notes exactly, printed word, because I've studied that word judo in jujitsu. Jujitsu actually means art and science working together as gentleness. So I don't know this is what etymology's taught me, and I've proliferated. So you could correct it, but it is, I don't think it's, you call it mind body crap, but I think you're talking about how the East has sold that to yuppies and the market, in the new age market. But indeed, the mind and the body are so connected, you can't separate them. And that's sort of what they're saying. Because when you said your original motive was you wanted to be fit, but you
Yeah.
didn't really want to go the jock route.
No.
And that's amazing how you said that, because I love this split between art and science. And then we get to this lecture McLuhan did in 66 at the Museum of Modern Art. He said art is to show what the world is made of. So, that's a funny thing, because should art be this rear view mirror, like recording stuff? Like what the cave artists, well, we're recording what we did today. That's sort of matching. Or should art be making, an experiment? So if you look at the word make, it starts with the two letters ma, M-A, which means mother giving birth. So we don't know if the difference between art and technology, or do we? Because technology makes us more human. That's the funny thing. Language, I think what you're saying, and most people go, no, technology ruins us. It fucks it. Wait, there's too much technology. Like, I want to be talking to someone with eye contact and them in front of me, direct experience. And, people our age, Simon and my age, we're like, two kids are walking down the street and they have cell phones and they're talking to each other on their cell phones. We go, ever think of talking to each other? Put your fucking, and now every adult has a cell phone super glued to their hand like this, and so it's just another tool. So you're just saying language is just another tool. It has services and disservices. But what's the disservice of language?
That it disconnects you from your body. It does.
But how? I mean, that it seems as like it,
Because you go, instead of directly sensing whatever it is that you sense, instead of just bathing in your awareness. I mean, this is what Zen is about. Sorry to take this in that direction again, but Zen, you basically sit down and stare at a blank wall, and the idea is, don't think, do not think, right?
Yeah.
That's the instruction. Now that's
Yeah.
impossible. That's really
Yeah.
impossible. But the thing that you do is you notice. So you're staring at a blank wall and going, and then this is good. I'm not thinking. Oh shit! I'm thinking that I'm not thinking. And then
Like,
stuff like it's really really hard. You can learn to sort of just go, oh, I'm thinking that, stop. That's the best you can do, is to notice that thoughts are thinking you, actually, most of the time. You're not really thinking anything. You're just being there, and this thing just comes up and you just follow it. And because you've got language, you can indulge that. I mean, I'm all this time I've been sitting here talking to you, I've been totally unaware of the space that I'm actually in. I'm in a virtual space of a conceptual space, which is the result of language. And
yeah.
that's why language is such it's the human singularity is what makes us human. That's the only thing that makes us human.
Thoughts are thinking you. That's perfect, because without words, the environment is animating you.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
And so then the thoughts, right? So if you want to get to know someone, I mean, I could try to analyze you, and is he, an INTP or an ENFJ or a
Yeah.
Sagittarius or right?
Yeah.
I can try to conceptualize you. What's your identity, right? Come up with the intersection of your age and whatever. But if instead,
Identity. This is a
want,
good one for you. Sorry to interrupt you, but
no,
right on that point, Jerry will like this. Identity is the theft of the self.
Yeah. Who said it?
Yes,
I
exactly.
think it's a woman called Estee Lauder who I've never heard of, and I found it one day and I thought, fuck me, that's absolutely the key. It's in my book somewhere. I'll have
Yeah.
to
Yeah,
look
we
it up.
can look it up. Identity is the
The
theft
theft of the self.
self. Yeah.
So in
Right.
a very specific sense that you were talking about, that
Yes.
is exactly it.
Yes.
Yeah.
If I want to get to know you, then I'm going to try and, as you said, create this shared conceptual and perceptual space where I point and gesture and you understand what's I'm pointing to, and we create you and I have to speak about everything that is not ourselves,
Mm.
and we'll grow together through building a shared common perception of the whole. Right, I come to know you entirely by speaking about everything that's not you or I, and we sort of
Mm.
triangulate in the end based on all the other third points of references which we build up between us and
Mm.
around us, right? And otherwise, like you said, identity in that sort, is like trying to create this, robotic construct to puppet your
Yeah.
body around in, and that is the
Yeah.
dualism that this focus on the self or the ego in that sense as a conceptual structure you can slowly mechanically think your way through. McLuhan said that Dale Carnegie was the Machiavelli of the 20th century,
Hmm.
because Machiavelli just told the prince, no, 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 you're not a person. If they're doing this, do that. If they're doing this, do that. Conquer that village. Make peace with this guy. It's like an if-then flow chart of how to be a prince, right? There's no being in
Right.
any of that. Here's the steps: 1, 2,
Oops.
3, robotically, conceptually, and Dale Carnegie
Something
is,
just happened here.
you know,
Sorry.
oh, you
Oops.
turned your camera off.
Yeah. How did I do that?
Oh, yeah, it just
Oh,
jumped
there.
off.
Come back. Come back.
But,
Oh,
but
there we go.
go
Yeah.
back
Okay.
to Sahara, Clinton. Dale Carnegie said what?
Dale Carnegie said,
That-
look them in the eye and act friendly and be their friend and glad hand them. And here's how you make friends. Go back like you're already their friend and they'll like you, and they'll pat your back and you pat theirs. And you've never come any closer to the person, but you've learned the rote, charismatic,
Right.
mask, bland formula to
Right.
go pretend to be a social, creature while still never ameliorating any actual, social tensions or fears you have. Put on a brave face every day and face the world, as opposed to go meld into the shared collective, experience of communing with your fellow human beings with the full dignity and that entails and whatnot. And so that's what an identity is it's this, cynical Dale Carnegie robot manipulate, and that's how we get to the whole conception of social constructionism today. This idea
Right.
of building people by retailoring their identities, like you can take a piece out and you harbor a bad viewpoint, so we're going to have, a 2-week struggle session to fix that good viewpoint, and then you'll fit in much more naturally and we can be friends again, right? So
Yeah. I have a lot of problem with identity. I just sort of. I want to have no identity. That's it's just it blocks everything, because the moment you have an identity, it's something that sort of limits you from being anything else, and particularly it limits the way people look at you. I mean, Wilhelm Reich. Oh yeah, the orgone guy. I mean, we're done, but we're not done. It's
true.
we haven't even started.
well,
True
that's Joyce said, "Love thy label as thyself."
Oh,
So, I mean, that's a pretty heavy poke at that.
yes.
He puts his name in the wake. He calls himself Shame's Choice. Like shame can own something, and Shame's Choice. And what
Wow.
I was curious about with both of what you just brought up was that Marshall said that violence causes identity, or identity causes violence. I think it's identity causes violence, right, Clinton?
Yeah.
Yeah, that identity.
Violence is the quest for identity.
Thank
He
you.
shortened that to
Isn't
quid,
that
quiddity, the quest for identity.
Yeah, violence is the quest for identity. Thank you. And
That's
so
very
here's my big question I always ask people is, a Brit who is a womanizer and a drinker and a comedian, brought Eastern philosophy to the West. Alan Watts. He's my hero. I listen to him every Sunday morning. It's like an amazing church. He's hilarious. He says, if you find out, everybody's trying to find out who they are. If you learn who you are, you're fucked. Like Simon, you're saying, I don't want to know why. I don't want identity. But, he was being facetious and happy and playful with deep Eastern philosophies, but he took it to the West. So people are a little like, well, can you bring the East to the West? So that was what we started with. But he said, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. So I always go, well, if we acknowledge what's really going on, then aren't we just empowering it? Why can't we just lay back and let it wash over us and have fun? But we want to talk about and figure out, because is that the human condition? Is the human condition conflict? So you guys can take that anywhere. Way too bad. But it's basically, of course we want to acknowledge what we think is an issue or something we can do with language. But isn't that in the long run just empowering it to roll over us? In other words, we are, I don't have a good question and I don't know what I'm talking about is basically it. It is too many questions. It's like, are we watching it happen or are we making it happen? How about that?
Is this about Simon's explanation of Aikido and don't bristle up when you see the punch coming?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that could. And Clint put it as a question, because we're always like, we're trying to invent new questions. But I learned from one of my youngins who comes to my group, like 20-year-old. He said, yeah, I learned judo. They said the guy who wins the battle is the one who is without a battlefield. It's like, you don't do this or that to win. You just never enter the battlefield. That's how you win.
Yeah. Yeah. Avoid the conflict.
So avoid the conflict. Yeah. But if the human condition is conflict, then how can you avoid it? By jujitsuing it, flipping it, whatever. Who knows?
Yes. Human condition is conflict. That's deep.
I think of it as the quest for identity being testing your limits, and there's no test of your limits like a fight to survive. You're gonna find out who you are at the end of it, right?
Yeah, I like the thing about the violence is the quest for identity.
Well, actually, that makes me think about how competitive video games, on one hand, the achievement of the competition of esports is the biggest industry, the biggest money-making spectator sport industry now in the world is esports. And really? Perhaps there's very few people of your age who sit around and watch other people play video games and listen to commentary about it as though it were a cricket match. The two commentators are, oh, he's playing the Zerg today and he's playing against the Protoss and he's got right, and listening to hours of literal sports commentary over a game of StarCraft, right? But I've got friends, I'll go do that sort of thing. I'm not a big video gamer myself or anything, but I appreciate I'm rolling with the times
well, it makes sense. I mean, it's like anything you're interested in doing. If you want to, it's like I go and watch an Aikido master because shit, it's like he's doing what I want to do, but he's doing it better. So if it's a video game, I guess it's the same thing. It's like, wow, did you see the movie pulled there? I guess
it's like these structured arenas for testing oneself and developing one's identity and gaining recognition and
developing one's identity, developing oneself. Yeah, it's just sort of moving the project forward.
I held the high score in Pac-Man for 15 years until someone else came along.
Wow, you did?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
There was a guy who cheated, actually. And there was a massive controversy in Pac-Man World High Score politics. It was apparently a very huge ordeal in this very niche community. And there's a whole documentary about the dude who cheated at Pac-Man and falsely held the world title for so many decades. The great shame of the reveal, right? I'm sure it's true for anything.
Jerry, I think I'm going to have to bring this to a close.
Yeah.
From
Yeah, we're going to close it. I got one closing statement, and I want to thank you both. It's really been fun, and I really appreciate it. And it was Seneca, one of these old philosophers, said, "There is no enjoying the possession of anything valuable unless one has someone to share it with." So, this is what I believe is sharing dialogue is what it's all about, and eye contact. And so greatly appreciate both your times and energies and all your wise words. And thank you.
Well, thanks for making it happen.
Yeah.
It was fun. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely.
Good.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure meeting you, Simon.
Likewise. Yeah. So
Thanks as always, Jerry.
this is up on YouTube somewhere if I want to go and fetch.
It is. I'll